Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Richard, as promised yesterday, today we're going to talk about an article called The Big Stall.
Right.
And the whole thing with this article is talking about, are we neglecting one group by working so hard to foster and help another group? And for the purpose of this week, we're talking about gender. Sex.
Right. There's some alarming information in this article.
Yeah.
And we said yesterday in an earlier podcast that we find, at least I did, I found much of the information in these articles to be alarming and bordering on disturbing, because it's information that I hadn't really given much thought to.
Right.
But there's a generation of males, maybe at least a generation of males, that is really struggling.
Right.
And I was blissfully unaware of it.
Right.
And this article sort of brought it into stark relief.
Right.
So, some alarming statistics here.
Yeah, so this is an article called The Big Stall. It's from Psychology Today, and it was published, this one's a little bit older. This was from last March 2016, and it is all about this, this dissonance, this difference between what we're seeing as we see women sort of progressing in some areas.
Right.
We're seeing men kind of fall behind in some areas.
Right.
And so, and it's in all areas, not just at school, but also at work and in social and
Right.
relationship life.
Yeah, and this is another one of those articles where much of the research much of the data was derived from college students because they're available, but it also gives us a microcosm of males and females
Right.
Working, being together and competing on pretty much level terrain, or what we typically think of as level terrain.
Right.
And so once again, we see this disparity about 60% of undergraduates now are females, so they have clearly overtaken males. It should be about 50-50. I think it's 51-49.
Yeah.
I think 51% men and 49%
Right.
women. So, but it should be about equal, but it's 60%. And then 58% of graduate degrees are earned by women. So
Right.
again, we see women sort of getting ahead of men in these regards. By contrast, in 1970, 20% of psychology graduate students were women.
Right.
I did my first degree in the 80s, and I think it was evening. I mean, I think there were as many women as men.
And that was in education.
It was in both. It was a dual.
Right.
So I was in psychology and education.
Right.
Education, it was clearly women.
Right.
Predominated.
Right.
But in psychology, it was about even. I think there were about as many. I wasn't aware of any gender, sex difference. So in 1970, 20% of psychology graduate students were women. Today, it's 70%.
Right.
So there's been a huge change.
Yeah.
And as women, and this article is called The Big Stall, the thesis of this article is that as women advance, as women are advancing, men seem to be stalled.
Right.
There's something happening to men.
Right. And there's as I was reading some of this, one of the things that it made me think about is, are we talking about one of those, what is it called, a ZeroSum game?
That's right.
Is there only so much? And so if one group is going to get more of it, then the other group is going to have to get less of it.
Right.
It doesn't seem like that should be the case. It doesn't seem like it should be that way, because there are certainly plenty of graduate programs and plenty of college placement. There's plenty of colleges out there where people can get degrees in different things. So why is it that just because one group is increasing in numbers, that the other group is decreasing in numbers? That doesn't necessarily make sense.
Well, one of these articles talks about that men may be looking at this as a zero-sum game.
Right.
When there are a limited number of seats in
Right.
universities, there are a limited number of jobs, there are a limited number of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And as women get more, and this article, they say women are ahead of men by about 10%.
Right.
It doesn't matter what we measure, whether it's enrollment or graduate or degrees or whatever it is, that women seem to be represent about 10% more of the population than and men tend to think of it as a zero-sum game.
Right.
That's what researchers are afraid of.
Right.
Is that men are thinking of this as a zero-sum game, and as a result, they're dropping out. They're not. They talk about motivation, as they're not motivated to succeed the way women are.
Yeah. And a lot of this, it makes me think back to in graduate school, we studied in like social psychology and stuff. We studied, image and how people relate different things to different groups, and that when you're thinking about things like marketing, and you're thinking about things like portraying a product or something that you want to put out there, if it's a product just for females, then you would have female actors in the ad. But if you wanted the product to be for males and females, you would have males in the ad, because females will buy things even if males are in the ad, but males won't buy things if females are in the ad. Right. And there's a little bit of that's a little bit aged, but it makes me think about this when it comes to these things. That so if it almost makes me think conspiratorially. Yeah. We had this big push for STEM, right? And
STEM, they now call that STEMinism.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's terrible. But you think about this big push for STEM, and that came right at the time that we started seeing this shift in numbers. While at the same time we sort of hold on to this somewhat false belief, false perspective that those STEM subjects are more male-driven than female-driven.
Right.
In that, more males go into engineering and mathematics and things like that than females. Again, as we said yesterday, not for any particular biological reason. Right. There's probably a social construct to that. But it's fascinating to me that we have these sort of cultural shifts that happen. And again, if we're thinking about it from a zero-sum perspective, perhaps that makes sense that males are sort of trying to find some way to shift a little bit more of the pie into their direction, into a direction that they may feel more comfortable with. Right. But you're right, when it comes to a lot of these areas, there's not, women are starting to far outnumber men. And
in some fields.
Oh, yeah. And the numbers are getting concerning as it relates just to men, having men in the field.
Right. I first became aware of this when I was at the University of Texas, and we had a doctoral program there, and there were 13 or 14 students admitted each year, and there might be one or two males. Right. The rest were all females in a very prestigious PhD program.
In my program, the year that I was accepted, there were 7 of us accepted into my program. I was the only male. The year before me, I think that they had 13, and there was only one male in that group. And so out of 2 years, 20 some odd, about 20 students, only 2 males in that whole cohort.
Now,
those 2 cohorts.
In keeping with this, what's happening to males? This question of what's happening to males. The other alarming piece of information is that in advanced countries, these are industrialized Western European American countries, the physical and mental health of men are both declining. Right. And I really wasn't aware of that. So there seems to be, it raises the question of whether there's some broader implication in this information. And what some people are beginning to postulate is that as women rise, improve, advance, it is affecting men's motivation and their engagement, their willingness to engage. And as a result, and this is the most frightening part of this, because they're not engaging in real stuff They're disengaging from classrooms. They're disengaging from relationships. They're disengaging from moving toward the future. And instead, they're caught up in gaming, pornography, and fantasy sports like fantasy football. They're putting their energy into these non-real activities.
Right.
We see it in sports, youth sports, fewer and fewer kids. And we say, well, is it because we expect kids to devote so much time? If you're going to be good, you have to play year-round and travel teams. But there is the possibility that men are disengaging from real endeavors, and they're engaging in these fantasy endeavors.
Yeah.
That's alarming.
Yeah. And concerning, because it is, and what we see statistically, it's starting younger and younger.
Right.
You know, the vast, whenever somebody talks about someone being addicted to gaming, we had a whole week on gaming last week. But when we talk about that, we're almost, not completely, but almost exclusively talking about boys.
Right. Yeah.
Almost. Very few situations do we talk about girls being addicted to gaming. And so, yeah, you're right. We have this sort of disengagement from academics, from professional, the professional world, and it is a little bit alarming.
You bring up a good point. If you look at elementary school students, we encourage our daughters to work, and they can become anything. Play softball, play volleyball, play soccer, even football. Okay.
Right.
We
go to medical school. Even and academically.
We're pushing and pushing and pushing. And the assumption is the boys are going to do okay. They don't need to be nurtured. And that's what everybody's talking about today in this. That it is great that we're pushing on it. You and I both have daughters, okay? And we want them to become whatever they want to be. So there is a personal aspect in this. So we push our daughters in a way that we don't push our boys because we assume, well, boys have an advantage anyway. They don't need it. Maybe they do need it. So as a result, even in elementary school, you see the boys disengaging from school while the girls are engaging more and including STEM. Yeah. Boys are disengaging. Yeah. Okay. Now
you're right. That's interesting.
Right. And when they disengage, there is this for boys. There seems to be an inverse relationship between girls' achievement and their self-esteem, and their self-esteem continues to go down as girls are succeeding. Theirs is going down. For example, Psychology Today did a study of 500 men, and one of the questions was, "What bothers you most about your current circumstances?" And to paraphrase, it said the fear of keeping up, the fear that we're not keeping up to the girls. Right. Okay. Now we know that we've always said, especially elementary schools are designed for girls. Right. When we used to laugh about that because we were thinking it from a behavioral standpoint. Right. Boys like to move around and all that stuff. But maybe it's more important than that. Girls are designed for elementary schools are designed for girls, and that's great for girls. But what is it doing to boys? And it's not just behavioral; it could be a self-esteem, motivation issue as well. Right.
And I think that I'm at fault with some of this as well, because I think that I have myself consistently or traditionally, typically, thought of we know that. If we're going to be honest and we're going to, talk about reality, things have traditionally been designed more in the male's favor. And so, sort of socially, culturally. And so, I mean, we still haven't had a female president, and we still have situations where here in the 21st century, we have the first female anything, because it's remarkable to think about that we could have had a history of hundreds of years here in the United States where we haven't had a female serve a particular role. So that's remarkable for a lot of reasons. But so I know that I have traditionally thought of it's things are much easier for males. The system is sort of designed to support males, and I think that in some ways that's still the case. But you're right. In making that assumption, what we've done is we've worked to help foster, females, and assumed that males are going to do okay because they have traditionally done okay, and by doing so, we're sort of letting them drop behind.
Right. The system was stacked in their favor to begin with, so let's help. Let's raise the girls up, get them equal to men. Well, now they're exceeding men.
Right.
And
which is fine.
Which is okay. I want the girls to succeed.
Well, I think that where I was catching myself with saying it's fine that we're supporting them. I think that we have to be careful that we don't create a scenario where either group has that much more of an advantage than the other group. I think that both groups need to be supported.
Right.
Because, success and the progression of us as a species, as a culture, is going to depend on both genders. Right. So it's important that we're fostering both of them.
Right. I want to there's one other point that they make in this article, and I know this will be of interest to you. You and I have discussed this many times, not in this way, but it was another one of those aha experiences. Right. So because boys are not engaging in this long trek to achievement the way girls are. Girls work hard in elementary school, middle school, high school, college. So there's this long effort, prolonged effort that they put into it. And boys are disengaging. Okay. So to make it, boys are doing gaming and pornography and all that. To make it, boys are saying, well, I think I'll develop an app.
Right.
And they call it, there's even a name for it, they call it the app trap.
Yeah.
Rather than working as hard as the girls, they're thinking, I'll hit a home run. I'll develop an app and or I want to develop a video game that everybody will want. And once again, it's not reality because most people are not going to develop the next Mortal Kombat or what is that game called?
I don't know. This is fun.
COD, Call of Duty. I have to do letters, right? The chances are you're not going to develop the next Call of Duty. You're not going to become fabulously wealthy. You're not going to create Facebook. You're not going to create Microsoft. It's like you're not going to be a rock star, no matter how much you think you're going to do this.
The probability is so low.
The probability of that is so low as to be non-existent. Right. But many boys are living in this, many 20-year-old males are living in this fantasy world that I'll stay home in a dark bedroom and create the next multi-million-dollar video game or website or whatever. Probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But they're disengaging. The issue is, and what they're saying is the boys are disengaging. And one other thing he says, and I didn't know about this, and I have to talk to some people about it. Young white males are the least desirable demographic. They're the least desirable college student. They're the least desirable employee. If a company can hire a woman or a minority, there's an enhancement. There's an incentive to do that. I don't know what it would feel like to be to know that you're the least desirable demographic. Yeah.
And the question that I would have, to extend that just a little bit is, do they know that they're the least desirable?
That's my question.
Because we know that, we know from the other statistics that, international statistics, that although the United States fares far below a lot of other countries as it relates to academics and things like that, we are number one by a long shot as it relates to confidence and self-esteem.
Yes, that's right. We think we're really good.
Right. So is there this relationship between the reality of being less desirable?
Right.
Is there a big difference between that reality and the perceived reality that they have of being, the confidence that they have, I think it's fascinating that these, 20-something-year-old males think that they can create the next multi-million-dollar app.
Right.
It's like, what do you know about programming?
I like video games.
Yeah.
It's what we talked about. Like, I'm going to go to medical school, but I have a 2.3 grade point average.
That dissonance is fascinating.
Right.
So,
but I agree with you. I don't know whether they know. But here's the other thing. I hear men and women in their 20s talk about affirmative action.
Right.
And they're opposed to it.
Right.
And what this issue came up again. It's going through the Supreme Court right now, the University of Texas case. And you hear white males and females say they're opposed. These are college students or college graduates. They're opposed to affirmative action. I don't think they know this part of affirmative action, however. I always think of it, well, you're a racist. You're being racist. It could be a much more complicated issue than that.
Right.
Because if these boys know that they're the least desirable demographic, I understand a little bit better now why they feel the way that they do.
Right.
Now, they're on the other end of that discrimination stick, which is another whole issue that we don't want to get into. Right now we're talking about just men and women, rather than students of color. But it raises that question: do they know?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's it becomes much more complicated than again when as we said in
that's what
the
we
first
said at the
podcast
beginning.
This is looking into this has really introduced a whole lot of other thoughts and ideas than we had really thought about before.
I've had a bunch of ahas as I've scratched around in this world.
Yeah,
so it's a little bit embarrassing to admit that I didn't really know all this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's just an indication of how complex all of this stuff is. So
that every issue is complex.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, all right, that is it for today, right? Until next time. Until next time.
There is
there's so much more to talk about.
I know.
So many more things going through my head. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.